So John, you stayed at home and worked on the land. What was it like then? That'd be the 50s, I suppose, isn't it?
Yes. It was, of course, during the 50s, 40s and 50s, so there were horse powers that was used. Tractors were on a novelty, and they came into being to tow the threshing machine, which would visit each farm once a year, maybe twice, depending on how much grain was to be threshed. And but ploughing and that kind of work was all done by horses. There was no electric light at the time I'm speaking of. You must remember that. I remember the ESB coming, rural electrification.
And how did you light the houses and heat the houses?
The houses were lit with paraffin oil and candles. Paraffin oil was rationed. There was a lady up at Lodge Road, Catherine Burke. I would think Mary Jo Muldoon would own the property today. The house, the site I think is absorbed into the Castlewell Road. She had a tank and she retailed paraffin oil. You were allocated about half a gallon a month, I think. I know it was used to come that low during the summertime anyways. And that's the way it was. I remember having to collect it with a can, with a special can, once a month from Catherine Burke. Others got it in various other places in town.
There must have been a lot of horses around the place if they were doing all the work by horse.
There was. Everybody had a horse.
Yeah, everybody had a horse.
Yes, everyone had a horse and ploughs and various harrows and various machinery, if you could call it, classify it as machinery, spring harrows and fixed pin harrows, etc. Then you had scufflers for moulding potatoes, and a lot of potatoes were made in ridges that time rather than drills, because the soil conditions around here seemed to be more suitable for it. There was compulsory tillage during the war, which was the main source of discussion and argument, maybe a bit of friction between government officials and the farmers. I think my father had to do 7 acres. And I remember seeing officials with maps checking it out that it was done. There was court cases and things like that over people who didn't comply. But
and were the farmers happy to comply, or did they resist it a bit? Or?
It made me happy, but it was the acreage was difficult to do it. And then the harvesting of these crops needed a big injection of manpower to harvest the oats and barley. You cut it with a scythe and you lifted the sheaf of oats and made it tie-in and tied it and put it into barts in the field. Then it had to be loaded again into horses and carts and brought into the haggards and made into stacks. I mean, this idea of combine harvesters and binders and things like that, they all came in later times.
And was it profitable? Was there money in it?
I suppose there was at the time, because there was a complete shortage of everything from pigs, from bacon to eggs and everything like that. All butter and everything was made at home. There was no such thing as sending milk to cream mills. It didn't exist in this part of the world, this part of Ireland. Now,
when did the big change come then, from horse to machine?
The change came in the mid-50s, I'd say, started. No, I got my first tractor in 1955, I think.
What was it?
It was a Farm Hall Cub, petrol-driven 9 horsepower. But it would plough and it would do all the farm work.
How much did it cost?
It cost about £300, I think, at the time.
That was a lot of money then.
It was fair bit of money. Now, you could get a Ferguson tractor then at the time. They were TVO tractors. Diesel tractors didn't come in until later. And the Ferguson tractors would be 2-furrow ploughs and be a bit more powerful. But for doing private farm work, the other one was quite adequate.
The Ferguson was the little grey one, was it?
The grey one is right.
There's still one around town, I think.
Yes, the International would be a red one. Was one down in Harry Clinton's until very recently. Maybe still is around.
I think Cecil Harkin has one, is he?
I think so.
Yeah.
Now, they're a collector's item today. And then, of course, there was the fairs in town. Was all cattle sold on the streets. And Westport was a rather large fair. I remember relatives of mine used to come from Glen Island, Glen Heston these days, with cattle and cows and calves, mare and foals. They'd be here in this place because we were convenient to the town the night before. And wouldn't go to bed at all, they'd be into the fair at 5 o'clock in the morning with their cattle.
They'd be travelling all night?
They'd be travelling all the day before and all night. Cattle used to be walked from Louisburg and from Newport and further down towards Mulranny. And it was all on foot on the roads. This thing of tractors with trailers and of course four-wheel drives and things, they're all more recent developments. There was also then, as we got on into the 50s and 60s, I became involved with farming organisations, and eventually we got involved in cooperative movement. And you had the legal difficulties. On one occasion, I remember being involved in importing a boatload of fertiliser at the quay, a basic slag. I remember getting 7 summonses for employing tractors to deliver fertiliser. It was illegal to do so, and it was supposed to be a monopoly to CIE or licensed hauliers, which didn't exist in the Westport area, and anyhow they weren't interested in delivering a half ton or a few bags of basic slag up country roading to farmers as was required.
And how did that work out? Were you convicted or?
No, I think on the technicality, the summonses were made out to John Mayock, and it should have been to Cropetic Co-op Limited. There was a flaw in the issuing of the summonses, and the late Joe King solicitor got me off for that one. But afterwards, I made damn sure that any fertiliser that was to be delivered was put in the name, a good receipt issued in the name of the owner of the tractor, rather than of the person who was purchasing it. It was ridiculous, really. At the same time, I remember it being in court. At the same time, there was a fleet of tractor owners from the Newport area prosecuted for drawing seaweed. And there was a decision handed down from the High Court, from the, I don't know, the Supreme, wherever a judge referred, the District Justice referred it for a decision on what was an agricultural crop. And the seaweed was to be an agricultural crop. I remember it distinctly. It had to be cultivated and harvested. The court ruled that seaweed was salvaged. It was not cultivated. Therefore, it was not an agricultural crop, and it could not be drawn with an agricultural tractor. I mean, but the finished product, the seaweed meal, was an ingredient of cattle feed. So that was an agricultural feed, and it was legal to draw the finished product, but not the original seaweed. I mean, the whole.
And how did that work out in the end?
I think eventually the Minister for Justice, the late Michael Moran, became Minister for Justice, and I think he told the courts and the guards to cop themselves on and forget about it. I think that's what happened. I know they kept drawing the seaweed, but I think for drawing cattle and things and fertiliser, then there was some relaxation that they could draw it for a neighbouring farmer who was restricted to 3 miles. If a man from Louisburg would say was coming into Westport with a tractor, he could bring out a half a ton of manure for a neighbour, provided that neighbour lived within 3 miles of him. That was
silly stuff.
It eased up. Then these 4-wheel drive jeeps came in around, and trailers and cattle marts came on the scene, and haulage of cattle and all became acceptable. But in those particular years, it was a nightmare. Put it mildly, and it was a device that was brought in, I think, to protect CIE from unfair competition. The CIE was an amalgamation of a number of companies that were going bankrupt at the time, and that was a way of providing a transport system.
Okay, little break.